Oles, my name is Clara Whitfield, and I am 71 years old. What I'm about to share with you isn't just a story, it's the moment my life split in two. The morning of my husband Thomas's funeral felt like the end of everything I had ever known. The sky was heavy with gray clouds, pressing down on us as if even heaven itself refused to smile that day. The cemetery was almost empty, just a handful of neighbors, our daughter-in-law, and my two sons, who stood on either side of the casket like strangers wearing my boys' faces. I thought I knew grief. I had lost my parents, I had buried friends, but losing Thomas was different. He was the center of my world for nearly 5 decades. We'd built a modest life together in the quiet town of Red Haven, where nothing ever really happened. At least, that's what I thought. As the pastor droned on about ashes to ashes, my hands trembled around the small handkerchief I clutched. Tears blurred my sight until I felt my purse buzz against my hip. A message? I shouldn't have looked. Not at that moment, but some instinct pushed me to glance at the phone. The words on the screen stole the breath from my chest. I am alive. That's not me in the casket. The blood drained from my face. My knees wobbled, and for a moment I thought I might collapse into the grave myself. My hands shook as I typed back, heart hammering. Who is this? The reply came instantly, as if the sender had been waiting. I can say, they said we're watching. Don said trust your sons. I nearly dropped the phone. My sons, my own flesh and blood, David and Andrew were standing just a few feet away, watching the coffin lower into the earth. Their expressions were carved from stone, their tears forced, their embraces cold. I forced myself to slide the phone back into my purse before anyone noticed. My throat felt tight, my breathing shallow. Around me the mourners moved mechanically, throwing dirt onto the coffin, but I could barely hear the pastor's words. My mind was screaming. Thomas was dead. I had seen his body in the hospital, pale and broken after the accident at his workshop. I had kissed his cold forehead. I had signed the forms, so who was sending me this message? And why did they tell me not to trust my sons? I looked at David first, my eldest. He had always been the ambitious one, restless, impatient, forever chasing more than this small town could give him. He was dressed in a tailored black suit that fit him too well, as though the funeral were a business meeting. His hand rested on his wife's arm, but his eyes kept flicking to his watch, as if he couldn't wait for this to end. Then Andrew, my youngest, softer, quieter, but no less distant. His grief seemed rehearsed, his sorrow like a mask he'd slipped on for the occasion. He avoided my gaze, looking anywhere but at me. For 45 years, Thomas had been my refuge, the anchor that kept me steady in the storms of life. And now, at the very moment I was supposed to be saying goodbye, doubt slithered into my heart. Who had I really buried? And what secret were my own sons hiding from me? When I first met Thomas Whitfield, I was 23 years old and working part-time at the corner bakery in Red Haven. I still remember the day he walked in, his hands blackened with grease, a stubborn streak of oil smudged across his cheek. He had been fixing up an old truck that refused to come back to life. He ordered black coffee, no sugar, and the way he smiled at me, shy, almost apologetic, was the beginning of everything. Thomas was never a wealthy man, but he was steady. He inherited his father's repair shop on Maple Street, and though it was small and unremarkable, he treated it like a treasure. I used to joke that he loved those machines as much as he loved me, and he'd laugh, pull me close and whisper, "Not even close, Clara. You're the only engine that keeps me running." We built a simple life, a little house on the edge of town, with a leaky roof that sang when the rain came. Money was tight, sometimes unbearably so, but we never lacked for love. When our first son David was born, I thought my heart would burst. Thomas held him like he was made of glass, whispering promises into his tiny ears. 2 years later, Andrew came along, softer in spirit but just as loved. Those boys were our pride. Thomas took them fishing at the Red Haven Creek. taught them how to change a tire before they were 12, and told them bedtime stories in the low, gravelly voice that made even the monsters sound less frightening. I believed we were a close family. But life has a cruel way of reshaping people. David was the first to change. By the time he was 16, he was already restless with small-town life. He would stare at our peeling wallpaper and ask, "Why don't we live somewhere nicer? Why don't we have what other families have?" Thomas, ever patient, would explain that money didn't measure happiness, but David never accepted that answer. Andrew followed his brother Sip's lead, always looking up to him, always imitating. At 18, David refused to work in the repair shop, saying, "I Sip's not going to spend my life covered in oil like you, Dad. I Sip's meant for more than this." I still remember the way Thomas Sip's face fell, though he tried to hide it. That night, he sat on the porch staring at the stars, his shoulders heavy. "He doesn't Sip just reject the shop," he whispered to me. "He rejects everything I am." Years passed. David moved to the city, taking a job in real estate. Andrew wasn't far behind, dabbling in investments and side businesses I never fully understood. They wore suits that made them look like strangers, drove expensive cars, and spoke of deals and profits as though they were the only measures of success. At first I was proud. My boys had escaped the poverty Thomas and I had lived with. They had opportunities we never dreamed of. But pride has a sharp edge. Their visits grew shorter, their calls less frequent, and when they did come home, it was as though they looked at us through a pane of glass. "Mom, Dad," David once said, gesturing around our old kitchen, "you can keep living like this. The place is falling apart. You should sell and move into something better." But that house wasn't just wood and nails, it was where Thomas and I had built a life, where we had raised those very sons now looking at it with thinly veiled shame. "Money has changed them," Thomas said one night as we shared coffee on the porch. "We stirred not enough for them anymore." I tried to deny it. I told myself they were busy, that one day they'd remember who they were. But in my heart, I knew the warmth had cooled. The bond that once tied us together had stretched thin, ready to snap. And yet, even then, I never imagined how far they would go. The days leading up to the funeral passed in a haze, but certain details refused to leave me alone. They clung to me like burrs in the dark. Thomas's death had been called an accident. That morning, I was told the machine at his workshop had exploded, throwing him against the wall and leaving him with severe burns and head trauma. It sounded plausible enough, except that Thomas was meticulous about his tools. He serviced every machine himself, never left so much as a loose bolt unchecked. He used to say, "Accidents only happen when people get careless, and I don't have the luxury of being careless." Yet suddenly, an explosion had taken him from me. The first thing that struck me as odd was how quickly David and Andrew appeared at the hospital that morning. The call had come to me first. I was the emergency contact, but by the time my neighbor Doris drove me there, my sons were already waiting in the hallway, their suits immaculate, their faces drawn into rehearsed sorrow. "Mom," David had said, pulling me into a tight embrace, "it's Sut's bad. The doctors don't think he's Sut, I'll make it." I wanted to collapse, but even through my tears, I remember thinking, how did you get here so fast? The second thing was their questions. Not about Thomas's comfort, not about treatment or recovery. No. David asked the doctor about insurance coverage. Andrew wanted to know if there were options for end-of-life care, as though my husband was already gone, lying in the next room. I snapped at them, I remember. "Donish just talk about money while your father sits fighting for his life." David just squeezed my hand too calmly. "Mom, we start just trying to think ahead." When Thomas finally slipped away 2 days later, I wasn't sure what hurt more, the sound of the machines flatlining, or the way my sons immediately started making arrangements. Within hours, David had contacted the funeral home. Andrew brought me forms for the life insurance policy. They worked like business partners at a board meeting, brisk and efficient, while I sat in shock, unable to think. The funeral itself only sharpened my unease. Thomas had lived in Red Haven all his life. He had fixed cars and tractors for half the town, helped neighbors without asking a dime, always ready with a spare part or a kind word. Yet the funeral was small, strangely small. None of his closest customers from the shop were there. None of the men who had shared beers with him after long days came. "Where are his friends?" I asked quietly, my eyes scanning the sparse crowd. "We didn't want to bother anyone," David said quickly, his hand tightening on my shoulder. Dad wasn't set one for big gatherings. This is what he would have wanted. But that wasn't true. Thomas loved his community. He would have wanted them there, to say goodbye. As the coffin lowered into the earth, my sons' faces flickered in and out of my vision like masks. Their eyes were too calm, their grief too shallow. They looked at each other often, silent exchanges I couldn't read, but that made my stomach twist. And then of course came the message. "I'm alive. That's not me in the casket. Don't trust your sons." If I had read it once, maybe I could have dismissed it as a cruel prank, but every detail, every memory of those days, lined up behind the warning, like soldiers ready to march. My son's efficiency, their fixation on insurance, the empty funeral. That night, when I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I whispered aloud, as if Thomas could still hear me. "Something Sep's wrong." As I said it, I can feel it. And for the first time in my life, the thought crossed my mind, what if my sons aren't grieving at all? What if they wanted this? The first night after the funeral, I barely slept. I kept replaying the text message in my head until the words etched themselves into my skull. "I'm alive. That's not me in the casket. Don't trust your sons." Was it possible? Could Thomas still be alive somehow? Or was someone playing a cruel joke when my heart was already in pieces? The next morning, as the light crept weakly through the curtains, my phone buzzed again. "Check the insurance papers. Look closely." I sat up so fast the blanket slid off my lap. My hands trembled as I reached for my purse. Another unknown number. No name, no clue who was sending these messages. I went straight to Thomas's old desk in the study. For years, he had kept our important documents in a battered metal box. Insurance policies, house deeds, tax forms, all neatly organized, labeled in his tidy handwriting. At first, nothing looked unusual. Then, as I scanned through the insurance documents, I froze. 6 months earlier, Thomas's life insurance coverage had jumped from $5,000 to $50,000. I had never heard a word about it. Thomas was cautious, yes, but he was also open with me. He wouldn't have made such a huge financial change without a conversation. So who had convinced him to increase it? My heart pounded harder as I kept searching. Beneath the life insurance papers was something even stranger, a workers' compensation policy purchased only 2 months before his death. I'd never seen it before. The coverage was specific: accidental death on the job. The numbers swam in front of my eyes. To a desperate man, or someone without a conscience, it would have looked like a windfall. That says when the phone buzzed again. The insurance wasn't his idea. They pressured him. They planned it. I dropped the papers on the desk as if they were burning my fingers. My breath came fast and shallow. Planned it. The words felt poisonous. Could it be true? Could David and Andrew, my boys, the ones I had raised, fed, cradled through fevered nights, have pushed their own father into signing away his life for money? The thought made me sick. But the clues were stacking against them. Over the next days, I noticed more strange gaps in our bank statements, large withdrawals I had no knowledge of, $2,000 here, $3,500 there. Always just before some urgent repair at the workshop that Thomas had never once mentioned to me. When I asked Mrs. Whitman, the bank manager, about it, she gave me a pitying look. "Your husband always came in with one of your sons. I assumed you knew." I almost collapsed right there in her office. One of my sons had been with him, helping him sign the papers. But Thomas's signature on those receipts, it didn't look right. It was shaky, clumsy. He had always had a steady hand. And the final blow came a few nights later. In Thomas's workshop, where I hadn't dared go since his death, I opened the bottom drawer of his desk. Folded inside was a piece of paper in his handwriting. The words were scrawled, uneven, but unmistakably his. David insists I need more insurance. Says it sasts for Clara, but something feels wrong. Andrew brought papers for me to sign. They say it's sassed to modernize the shop, but I do not understand them. Why the rush? I dropped to my knees right there on the concrete floor, clutching the note to my chest. Tears blurred my vision. Thomas had known. He had suspected something. And now, with the text still buzzing into my phone, the bank withdrawals, the changed insurance policies, the warning by his grave, no longer felt like a cruel joke. It felt like the truth. The messages didn't stop. Each day, at odd hours, sometimes dawn, sometimes past midnight, my phone buzzed with instructions. Always brief, always chilling. Go to the police, ask for the report. The workshop was staged. Look again. Don't believe what your sons tell you. At first, I hesitated. What if I was losing my mind? What if grief was twisting shadows into monsters? But the note in Thomas's handwriting was proof enough. He had feared something. He had feared something. He had written it down because he knew. So, trembling but resolute, I walked into the Red Haven police station one gray morning. Sergeant Calloway, who had known Thomas for decades, greeted me with kind eyes. I need the accident report from my husband's death, I told him, gripping the counter so tightly my knuckles turned white. He frowned, flipping through files, then his brow furrowed deeper. Mrs. Whitfield, there is no accident report. My heart stuttered. What do you mean? The machine at his shop exploded. That's what my son said. The hospital. The sergeant shook his head. No explosion, no fire. According to the medical report, your husband was brought in unconscious with signs of poisoning. The word slammed into me like a hammer. Poisoning. Traces of methanol in his blood. The sergeant continued gently. Enough to cause blindness, brain damage, death. The hospital should have told you. I staggered backward, my vision swimming. Poisoning. My Thomas had been poisoned, not killed in an accident. Why didn't anyone tell me? I whispered. He hesitated. The immediate family requested confidentiality to avoid speculation. It says here your sons signed the papers. The room tilted. David and Andrew, my sons, they had known, they had hidden the truth. I left the station in a daze, the word poison echoing in my skull. Outside, the air felt too thin, the world too bright. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the car keys. When I got home, I collapsed at the kitchen table. The phone buzzed almost instantly. Now you know. It wasn't an accident. They poisoned him. And you her next. I dropped the phone as though it burned. My chest heaved, my throat closed. Next. The realization clawed at me. My sons hadn't just killed their father. They were planning to kill me too. Every look, every word, every concerned smile since Thomas's death. Suddenly I saw the mask beneath it. They weren't protecting me. They were managing me, containing me, waiting for the right moment. I sat there in the silence of my little kitchen, the walls closing in, the ticking clock impossibly loud, and for the first time in 71 years of life, I understood what it meant to be truly, utterly afraid. Not of strangers, not of fate, but of my own flesh and blood. After the police station, nothing felt the same. Every sound in the house startled me. Every ring of the phone made my heart leap into my throat. I tried to act normal around David and Andrew, but inside I was unraveling. I could see it now, their eyes studying me, their voices just a shade too careful, their questions always circling back to one thing. One evening, David arrived with a forced smile and a stack of papers tucked neatly into a folder. He poured himself a glass of wine from my cupboard without asking, as though my home already belonged to him. Mom, he began in that calm, patronizing tone he had mastered. Andrew and I have been thinking, This house is too much for you now. You should be better off in a place where people can look after you, a retirement community. I set my teacup down carefully, so my shaking hands wouldn't betray me. I don't need a home. I have this home. David Sepp's smile tightened. Come on, Mom, be reasonable. You can keep living in the past. Dad Sepp's gone. We have to be practical. Practical. That word again. The same one he'd used in the hospital when Thomas was still breathing. I'll think about it, I lied, watching his eyes glint with satisfaction. But inside, I was screaming. 2 days later, Andrew came by. He brought pastries from the bakery downtown, my favorites from years ago. He placed them on the table with exaggerated care. You sir not eating enough, Mom, he said. Why don't you try one now? They said fresh. I remembered the text, don't eat or drink anything they give you. I forced a smile and pushed the plate toward him. You first. For a fraction of a second, I saw something flicker in his eyes, panic, hesitation. Then he laughed too loudly and shook his head. I already had lunch. The pastries sat untouched on the table between us, their golden crusts gleaming like a silent warning. That night, I found myself double-checking the locks on every door and window. The same sons I had once nursed through fever and nightmares now felt like predators circling my home. And then came the cruelest twist. One morning, both David and Andrew arrived together, bringing with them not just pastries this time, but paperwork, thick, official-looking documents. Mom, David said smoothly, we need to talk about your health. We have noticed changes. Confusion, forgetfulness, it's normal at your age. Andrew nodded gravely. We spoke to Dr. Ellison. He says paranoia after losing a spouse is common in women. He thinks you should be evaluated. My stomach turned cold. They were trying to paint me as unstable. I am not paranoid, I said, forcing steel into my voice. I am grieving, that's all. David slid the papers across the table. It's for your own good, Mom. If you agree to the community voluntarily, we all have to involve the courts. Guardianship, you have to worry about anything. Andrew and I can handle the finances for you. Guardianship, the word rattled through me like a death sentence. They weren't just after Thomas's insurance, they wanted everything. My house, my savings, my freedom. And to get it, they were ready to lock me away, silence me forever. I sat there, staring at my sons, the boys I had rocked to sleep, the boys whose scraped knees I had kissed, and realized they were no longer mine. They were something else entirely. And if I didn't act soon, I would disappear just as Thomas had. The night after David and Andrew pushed those papers across the table, I sat at the kitchen counter staring at them, under the weak glow of the overhead bulb. My hands trembled so violently, I could barely hold my teacup. I was cornered. If I refused to sign, they'd claim I was unstable. If I signed, I'd hand them everything. Either way, I would lose. And then my phone buzzed again. You sir running out of time. Go to 415 Maple Street, ask for Lewis Kane. He can help you. My heart thudded. 415 Maple Street. That was an old address on the edge of town, near the industrial district. For a moment, I wondered if it was a trap, but what choice did I have? The next morning, I put on my thickest coat, tucked Thomas's note into my pocket, and drove there. The building was a squat brick office, with faded lettering on the window, Kane Investigations. Inside, it smelled of coffee, and old paper. A man in his 50s with silvering hair and sharp, tired eyes looked up from behind a desk, stacked with files. You sir Clara Whitfield, he said, without me introducing myself. I've been expecting you. Something in my face must have shown my shock because he raised a hand. Your husband hired me months ago. He thought his sons were planning something. He didn't live long enough to see the proof. My knees nearly gave out. Thomas, even at the end, he had been trying to protect me. Lewis Kane slid a file across the desk. Everything we found so far. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside were photographs, bank records, and transcripts. I saw images of David and Andrew walking into a downtown insurance office, papers in hand, copies of forged signatures, text messages between my sons discussing timelines and payouts. And at the bottom, a grainy audio file on a flash drive. Lewis pressed play. David Tep's voice came through first, calm and cold. The old man Sip's insurance is in place. We just have to make sure he drinks it. Andrew Sepp's voice followed, lower but unmistakable. And Mom, she sell be easy. Stress alone might take her out, but if not, we sell handle it. My blood ran cold. There it was. Proof of everything I had feared. I pressed a shaking hand to my mouth as tears filled my eyes. My boys, no, not my boys anymore, my predators, planning to kill their father, planning to kill me. Lewis watched me quietly, then said, "We have enough to go to the police, but you need to be careful. They sell sense you Esther onto them." "I can't stay in that house with them," I whispered. "You one sit," he said firmly. "We still move fast, but for now you need to act normal. Sign nothing, eat nothing they bring you, and whatever you do, don't sit be alone with them." I nodded, my heart pounding. For the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't dared feel. Hope. Thomas had been trying to protect me from beyond the grave, and now with Cain's help, maybe I could finish what he started. Maybe I could survive this. The plan came together faster than I expected. Cain told me the police needed more than paperwork and whispers. They needed a confession, something undeniable, something that would close every loophole David's slick tongue might try to wriggle through. We decided to set a trap. I invited my sons to the house one evening. My voice over the phone was steady, practiced. "Ain't Sip been thinking about what you said?" I told David, "about the retirement home. Maybe it's Sep's time we talk about it properly." There was a pause, then his voice softened, triumphant. "That's the right decision, Mom. We shall be over tonight." When I hung up, my hands trembled so badly I could barely hold the phone. Cain placed a small recorder under the kitchen table, tucking it neatly between the wood slats. "Keep them talking," he told me. "Don't Sep show fear. I shall be nearby. You won't Sep be alone." By the time the knock came at the door, my chest was a drumbeat of panic. David and Andrew entered like businessmen sealing a deal, both in dark suits, their smiles thin and sharp. We sat at the table, the papers between us. David poured me a glass of water, sliding it toward me. "Mom," he said gently, "we only want what's Sep's best for you. You can Sep manage everything on your own anymore. This guardianship will protect you." Andrew leaned forward, lowering his voice as if coaxing a child. "You shall still have the house. We shall take care of all the hard things. No more stress for you." I looked from one to the other, forcing myself to hold their gaze. "And what about Dad?" I asked quietly. For the first time, they faltered. A shadow crossed Andrew Sep's face. David cleared his throat. "Dad Sep's gone, Mom. You can see it, keep dwelling on it." "Is that why you poisoned him?" The words slipped from my lips like knives. The silence that followed was suffocating. Andrew Sep's eyes went wide, darting to David. David Tip's jaw tightened. "You Sep's been listening to nonsense," he snapped. "Who Sep's been filling your head with lies?" My heart thundered, but I pressed on. "I know about the insurance, the withdrawals, the policies you forced him to sign. I know you planned it." David leaned across the table, his face darkening. "You don't say no anything." Andrew Sep's voice shook. "Mom, please don't Seps do this. Just sign the papers. Let Seps put all this behind us." I almost broke, but then I remembered Thomas's note, his shaky handwriting. Something feels wrong. I steadied my voice. "The police know. They Seb heard everything." Right on cue, Cain stepped through the doorway, flanked by two uniformed officers. The flash of their badges cut through the air like lightning. David surged to his feet, his mask finally shattering. This is ridiculous. She sits senile. You can sit believe her. But the recorder under the table was still blinking red, capturing every word. Andrew sagged back in his chair, pale as chalk. David, he whispered, they know. The officers moved quickly, pinning David's arms as he struggled and cursed. Andrew didn't fight. He just lowered his head, tears streaking his cheeks, and let them cuff him. As they were let out, David turned, his voice dripping venom. You think you won, Mom? You destroyed your own family. I stared back at him, my chest hollow. No, David, you destroyed it the day you killed your father. The door closed behind them, and the house was silent again. I sank into my chair, shaking so hard I thought my bones might rattle loose. Kane placed a steady hand on my shoulder. It's over, he said softly. But deep inside, I knew it wasn't. Not really. Nothing would ever erase the truth. My sons had tried to murder the man I loved, and me. The justice was theirs to face now. Mine was to live with the ruins they left behind. The weeks after the arrest blurred into a fog of courtroom statements and long sleepless nights. Reporters gathered outside my little house in Red Haven, eager to spin my pain into headlines. Sons charged with father's murder. Inheritance plot shocks small town. I stopped reading after the first article. Words on paper could never capture the truth of what had been stolen from me. At the trial, I sat in the front row, my hands clasped tight in my lap, while David and Andrew faced the jury. They looked smaller in their prison uniforms, stripped of the suits and masks they had worn like armor. Andrew refused to meet my eyes. David glared at me with the same cold defiance he had worn since boyhood, as if daring me to regret choosing truth over family. When the verdict came guilty on all counts, I didn't cheer, I didn't weep, I simply closed my eyes and whispered Thomas's name under my breath, as though he could hear me across the divide. Life after betrayal is a strange kind of survival. Some mornings I woke with the crushing weight of loneliness, reaching for a hand that wasn't there. Other days I walked through town and felt the eyes of neighbors on me, pitying, curious, sometimes horrified. But through it all, I carried Thomas with me. I kept his note in my purse, folded and worn at the edges, a reminder that even in his final days he had tried to shield me. At night, when the silence pressed too heavy, I read it again and again. Something feels wrong. He had been right. And because I listened, because I believed, I was still alive. With Kane's encouragement, I started something new. The Whitfield Foundation for Victims of Family Crimes. A small charity at first, little more than a desk in my dining room, but it grew quickly. Letters poured in from people who had been betrayed by those they loved most. Siblings, spouses, even children. Stories of greed, manipulation, and pain. For the first time since Thomas's death, I felt purpose again. My tragedy became a light in the dark, for others stumbling through their own. Some nights, I still dream of my sons, as they were laughing boys with scraped knees and bright eyes, running through the yard with their father chasing after them. I wake with tears, mourning not just the husband I lost, but the sons I thought I had. But grief is no longer my master. I tend to Thomas's grave every Sunday, planting fresh flowers by the stone that bears his name. I speak to him softly, telling him of the lives the foundation has touched, of the people we've helped. Sometimes when the wind stirs just right, I almost hear his gravelly laugh on the breeze. I will never forgive David and Andrew for what they did, but I will not let their cruelty define the end of my story. I am Clara Whitfield. I survived the unthinkable, and though betrayal has scarred me, it has also sharpened me. The truth destroyed my family, but it saved my life. And for that, I will carry it, always.